So that's accurate, what you just said? You want to increase production?
Absolutely. I said it at the hearing.
Well, wait a minute. We had no hearing on this bill.
No, we had a hearing with the oil
We had a
company.
hearing.
Oh, I don't know, maybe you
generally.
weren't on the subcommittee.
Yes, I was there.
All right.
I recall the questionable positions that you took that day. But look, we didn't have a hearing on this bill.
That is
We didn't have a
correct.
markup on this bill, and I think
I'm
some
not
of
arguing
the
that.
anxiety that we're dealing with right now could have been mitigated by having had the full committee process, subcommittee, full committee markup, bring it to
That
Rules
takes,
Committee.
you know how long that takes, and we have a crisis now. So that's my justification. I agree with you, it didn't go through regular order, but because of the emergency. That's the
Well,
reason.
the emergency also was slow in development. Most of us have seen this actually in evolution since January 21st of 2021, because that's clearly when the crisis began. We all felt it when we filled up our cars. You know, the other thing that came out in that hearing that you referenced, 2 years ago, the losses of these companies were absolutely staggering. And in fact, we're probably very fortunate that we did not lose more companies, leading to greater consolidation and a greater propensity for price manipulation. We're fortunate that a number of these companies did survive that downturn. And I know, probably heard it from an Oklahoman, but the cure for low oil prices is low oil prices, right? The market does tend to adjust. Now, it's all ground we've covered before, but the shame of it is that this is the hearing we're having on this. We should have had the opportunity to talk about this in our committee, because our committee does good work. Ranking Member Morris Rogers is right. We do great work in our committee. Our committee is, remember 40 years ago, people thought that if we prohibit the exportation of crude oil from this country, we'll keep the cost down for the consumer. And we actually had just exactly the opposite effect, and it was removing that restriction on exportation of crude oil that really lifted our economy back in 2016 and 2017 and provided the energy independence which we enjoyed for a brief period of time that really provided us significant opportunities in our foreign policy, for example. I mean, I remember the debates between then Senator McCain and then Senator Obama talking about sending all that money to the Middle East, to people that dislike us, and how great it would be if we were energy independent. And then 8 years later, we achieved that energy independence, and it was significant. And it was very frustrating to watch that bargained away for reasons that I don't understand, that predated the Ukraine war by easily a year's time. Now look, many of these products are sold on a global market. So if we do your price control bill that you're asking us to do, how does that affect, on the larger scale, how does that affect the global market? It's probably going to be, that's going to be indifferent to whatever we do on the local scale or on the national scale.
Well, I don't think it's indifferent, but I mean, it was what I didn't mention, and I think this kind of goes along with what you're saying, is that we see the same thing internationally. The Wall Street Journal had an article the other day about how the largest oil conglomerate or whatever in Saudi Arabia was making even bigger profits because obviously they were manipulating the production as well and keeping the production down. So what's happening here in the U.S. with the companies that testified before our hearing is also happening in Saudi Arabia and there's others. I mean, it's like a cartel or a monopoly. They're trying to keep production down to keep the price up. But the hope would be that at least, here in the United States, we should, hold the companies responsible for what they're doing. But I agree that you can't control what happens in Saudi Arabia, and they're doing the same thing.
But you can if you are producing, as Mr. Cole pointed out, we upped our production almost double in the,
Yeah,
in
but
those
it's
8 years.
right, but it has not increased in the last 2 or 3 years. It's less.
Because of the demand destruction that occurred in 2020 with the coronavirus. And yes, these things do take, these are big operations with let me just ask you this, what have we done to increase the availability of capital, to decrease the cost of capital for these companies that are doing the exploration? That actually came up in our hearing that you referenced. Have we done anything to reduce the cost of capital for these countries in exploration and production?
I mean, I can't answer
The
that.
answer is no, of course. We haven't. We've made it harder. If anything, with all of the crazy ESG stuff that we do, it makes it more difficult for companies to access capital. Mr. Cole referenced the evidence of price gouging. We've had hearings in our committee. You may remember some of them after Hurricane Katrina. Greg Abbott, now my governor, who was our attorney general in Texas after Hurricane Katrina, actually went after a couple of people locally in Texas, but it was it wasn't widespread. There were a couple of bad actors. They were held accountable, and the problem basically was non-existent. Do you remember those hearings?
I don't offhand, no, but I believe you.
Well, and that's exactly the point. I mean, there are existing laws that prevent price gouging, right?
No, there are existing laws, but what I'm saying is that this bill is different because it's saying because we have an energy emergency because of the price going up so much, that we would declare an emergency and then we would compare prices and say that this is excessive and this is market manipulation. I don't think the FTC has the ability to do that right now.
Well, Mr. Ranking Member Rogers, let me ask you a question. He said, you heard the chairman say that an emergency could be declared. Do we know what the parameters of this emergency are?
No.
What defines its beginning, what defines its end?
It's extremely vague.
So how does that get us to a better place, Mr. Pallone?
It gets us to a better place because the president can say that because prices have been going up
Let me
so
interrupt you.
much.
That's it. Price caps, right? The president can say,
It's not
this
a
is too
price-
high, I'm putting a cap on it.
It's not a price
That is
cap.
exactly what you're doing, and don't try to deny it.
It's
That's
not the same as-
exactly as was pointed out to you by the ranking member. Yes,
No, I disagree with Mrs. Rogers. I don't think it's in any, she used the example with the negotiating prices for drugs. I think it's very similar in the sense that we're not putting a cap on the price. In one case, we're negotiating the price. In this case, we're saying that if it's
Okay, that's
excessive, then we're
don't
going to
get me
call
started.
you.
That's a separate argument.
Okay.
Ranking member Rogers, you wanted to say?
It's not a price per se.
Thank you. The chairman asked where in the bill. I'd point to, let's see here, we're on page 3 under subsection B, number 2, where it says another appropriate benchmark period as determined by the commission. Part of the challenge is that this is an extremely vague authority that is given to the FTC. The FTC currently they can investigate price gouging. What is different about this legislation is that this is under an emergency declared by the president, where then the FTC can come in and determine if there's these unfair and deceptive practices that aren't defined in the bill either. But if you look at state law that has defined those kind of practices, that's where that language is used by states in some cases where they'll, I could go state by state, but some, it allows then for the commission to determine what the price would be. So that's where the price caps come in. And because this bill is so broad and vague, it's broad authority given to the FTC through the president's emergency declaration, and we're still living in a public health emergency declaration that has been used beyond what I think many of us ever imagined would be allowed during a public health emergency. This is an energy emergency that is very broad and vague, and it would allow, in this case, the FTC to come in and determine what the price of gas should be.
So we're allowing the executive, we're allowing the president to declare the emergency, the parameters of which are undefined, the beginning and end are amorphous, and this will be done under rulemaking at the Federal Trade Commission. Just leads you to wonder what do the people even need a Congress for? Why, where are we in this equation? And the answer is missing in action. Look, there's plenty of things we could do to ameliorate this price crisis. Lots of things that have been talked about. Ranking member has talked about them. Mr. Cole has talked about them. But for whatever reason, this administration refuses to go down that road. It is wrong that this crisis is absolutely avoidable, could have been avoided, should have been avoided, and for whatever reason, now we're doubling down on the very types of things that brought us to this point and will indeed make it worse. So thanks for the time. I'll yield back.